notices. Hello.
Hello.
Welcome back to Coaching Corner with my handy dandy slide. Huh?
You have a new thing on your door.
I do, because I got a polyamory flag for Pride to hang on my tent and then forgot the zip ties that I was going to use to hang it up. So it sat in my bag the whole time because it was too windy.
So that's the polyamory flag?
Yes. So it's a variation of it. There are many. And that was the only one that Amazon had that was not $30 and would take 3 weeks to get here. So I went with that one, but it's not my favorite because it's not super pretty.
Yeah.
I like pretty.
Pretty
So,
too.
we decided on boundaries today. I know you love talking boundaries with me so much.
I mean, boundaries are so good and so hard.
I can think of other things like that too. Like pistachios. What are you thinking about?
I have a bag of pistachios right next to me.
That's actually kind of amazing. I do not. So I love boundaries. Boundaries are my favorite because a lot of times people don't even like recognize that they can have boundaries. And okay, so like I have really big feelings on when people try to say it's a boundary, but it's actually a rule that they're trying to implement.
I was just going to say, tell me the difference between boundaries and rules because a lot of people don't understand.
Well, and then there's also agreements too. So a boundary is something that you can control how you behave, how you react, what decisions that you make. A rule is the illusion that you can control somebody else. Because even if you say, so this comes up in polyamory a lot, is like, I made it a rule that my partner can't bring their other partners over to the house. Well, technically, you can't control that. You can tell your partner you can't bring anybody over, but can you actually stop them from ever having anybody at the house?
Yeah.
You can't. It's the illusion of control. So a boundary says, okay, well, anywhere from if you bring other partners to the house, I am going to move out and we will no longer live together, to if you bring partners over to the house, I will not be giving up my space, usually a shared bedroom, for you to use. So I can't stop you from bringing them over, but I am not going to vacate the bedroom just for you to have fun.
Okay.
That kind of thing. And then an agreement is when two parties agree on something that affects only them. So like sometimes you'll see somebody will be new to polyamory and they'll say, well, my spouse says that I can't hook up with anybody on the first date. Okay. But like, why is your spouse trying to make a rule, trying to hold on to the illusion of control over a decision that is between you and another person?
Right.
Y'all didn't agree to that, so it's not it's not actually something that they can dictate. Whether or not you choose to abide by it is different. But then that's your autonomy, and that gets really complicated really fast. So, yeah, big feelings on shit like that.
I can tell.
Yeah. So you tell me your feelings on boundaries.
My feelings on boundaries. I think more people should have more boundaries.
I agree.
I think we've all been conditioned to think that having boundaries is selfish. I think it's easy for us to believe that if we have and enforce boundaries with those we love, it makes us a bad person.
Mhm.
I think when you're used to being a people pleaser, boundaries are really fucking hard.
Yes.
I think boundaries are important to have, enforce, and model when you're a parent.
Uh-huh.
I think I'm better at boundaries now than I used to be because I now know that they're allowed. That's all I got.
Not just allowed, but like, how much better is life with boundaries?
Mm.
Ooh, I can make that a program. Life is better with boundaries. Sounds fantastic. I I laughed when you said having boundaries as a parent because I have gotten a lot of crap about some of the boundaries that I have as a parent.
Mm.
Um, because you so if you're in any kind of parenting space, you see a lot of people saying, "Oh, I'm just so touched out and I'm tired of my kids using me as a jungle gym," and like
Mm-hmm.
they and then I come in and I'm like, my kids have to ask for a hug. My kids can't just walk up to me and start hugging on me. I don't allow that. I set boundaries around that. And I get crucified because people think that I am depriving my children of much needed love and affection and attention when really all I'm just doing is illustrating the importance of boundaries and modeling it for them and teaching them how to set the same thing. So my kids,
And teaching them how to ask for what they want and need.
exactly. So like my kids have to ask me for a hug, but guess what? I don't just go up and hug them either. I say, "Hey, can I have a hug?" And sometimes they tell me no, and I'm like, "Okay, cool, thanks." Like, that's all there is to it. But you would think that I was like beating them with sticks to say, "No, I don't want a hug right now." And it all started because I recognized, so this was before my youngest was actually diagnosed with sensory processing disorder, but now I know I have it too, going through that process. But it would literally, like, sometimes it literally feels like fire when people touch me. And like, then it makes me angry that I'm being touched because I'm already uncomfortable and now somebody's touching me. And when you have small children, they don't understand this. They just throw their bodies around wherever they want to be at the moment. And so like I didn't want to yell at them as a reaction to this discomfort that I was feeling. So I had to figure out like, okay, how do I start enforcing these boundaries? It's like I don't want to be touched right now. And that's the thing with boundaries too, and especially with kids, but in general is like I make it about me. What is
Right.
it about my needs? It's not that you're doing something wrong. It's not that you're wrong for wanting to be close or wanting cuddles or whatever. It's I'm not capable of it right now because I am uncomfortable or I just plain don't want to.
Mhm.
Like sometimes I tell my kids, and it's easier now that they're older because they can understand it, but it's like sometimes you just don't want to be touched. Sometimes you just don't want to be talked to, and that's okay.
Yeah. I had a conversation. This isn't necessarily related to boundaries, but I had a conversation with my children. We were talking about ADHD this morning, and I have ADHD, and my almost 8-year-old son has ADHD. And he was asking me some questions, and I was telling him, I was like, sometimes I get really frustrated with y'all when you come up and talk to me. And it's not because you are doing anything wrong. It's because the hyperactivity in my brain, I'm thinking about so many things at once. And I'm like really focused on what's happening in my head, the thoughts that are happening, that sometimes I have a hard time pausing what I'm thinking to focus on you. And sometimes my reaction isn't great and it comes out as me being frustrated with you. But it's not me being frustrated with you. It's me being frustrated with the way that my brain is working in the moment.
Yes. So actually we deal with that a lot too because all three of the adults in our house have ADHD.
Mhm.
And so one of the things that we do is like I'm a huge fan of preface statements
Mhm.
and preface conversations is like So especially since starting this business, I'm more focused more often. Before I was just a stay-at-home mom, so getting interrupted wasn't really a big deal for the
Mhm.
most part, unless I was like ordering groceries or something. Um, but we had this preface conversation where it said, if you come up to me and you start talking to me without making sure that you have my attention and I can pause the thoughts going on in my head, I'm not going to respond to you. You can choose to sit there and wait until I get to a point where I can respond to you.
Mhm.
But if you just start talking at me, you are not going to get a response from me
Yeah.
because I cannot disengage my brain and remember where I'm at to respond to you. And also, I need a minute to count to 10 in my head because that I don't mean for it to, but that triggers an anger response in me. When
Mm.
somebody comes up and just starts talking at me, that triggers an angry feeling, and it's not anybody's fault. It's just what happens when my brain gets pulled in another direction without warning. I cry when plans change. I don't do well with changing directions.
Right.
Like, and so now my kids know that if they come up and they start talking at me and I don't answer them, they have it in their head, "Oh, I need to wait." And so then
Mm.
they'll say, "Excuse me," and they'll stand there and wait until I can disengage my brain from what I'm doing. And it doesn't mean anything about them. It doesn't mean that they are a problem. It doesn't mean that they are an interruption. It
Mm.
means my brain needs time to transition. That means they need to be patient.
Yeah.
That's how we handle that because we have a lot of that in our house. And if they I mean, because sometimes the mom brain will override the focus,
Mhm.
and so I'll immediately start responding to them, and sometimes it'll or trying to listen to them, and sometimes it'll have to be like, "You did not have my full attention, so I have no idea what you just said to me," and it's not because I don't care, it just didn't register.
My son in the car, I said something to him about pistachios. We were talking about pistachios. I was like, well, next time I buy this kind, I'll take them out of this bag and put them in a container with a lid so it's easy for you to open and close. Okay. And he goes, okay. Actually, I wasn't listening. I didn't hear what you said. I just said, okay. Can you say it again?
Yes.
Thank you so much for letting me know because I sometimes do that too. And I would rather know right away and be able to repeat it and like us be on the same page.
Yes. Okay, so I fucking love that. I mean, I love your kids already, but, like, I fucking love that that, like, they're able to articulate that kind of thing because that's exactly what happens is sometimes we get on autopilot, and so that's a very common occurrence in our house. I know
Yeah.
I responded to you, but I wasn't actually paying attention.
Right. Yeah. And I've modeled that with my kids. Like I'll ask them a question, hey, what do you want for dinner? And then my brain is onto something else. And they answer me, and 5 minutes later, I'm like, hey, I asked you a question and then I didn't listen to the answer and I still don't know what you want for dinner. Will you tell me again?
Yes, and we call that out too, like, we don't make them wrong for it, but it's like you asked a question and didn't listen for the answer. Like,
Yeah.
that's not helpful.
Right.
Um, but, and then the other thing too that so one of the things that I struggled with early on in my marriage with Chris, and this is part of how we ended up getting separated, was I didn't know how to be okay with like I need time to process this, or
Right.
I can't handle this anymore. Like my brain is just done. And it felt like a personal attack on me. It felt like, okay, clearly you don't care about me because if you cared about me and fixing this, then you would have no problem staying in because my brain was hyper focused and his brain was overloaded and wanted to disengage. And
Mhm.
I didn't understand that there was a difference between these two experiences. Like this was foreign to me. And so I was having a conversation with somebody the other day, and it was a pretty deep, pretty serious conversation. And I really appreciated when they were able to say, I cannot stay in this conversation anymore. It is, my brain does not find this interesting anymore. And it was
Mm.
a really serious, heavy conversation. So, you know, 5, 10 years ago, it would have been really easy for me to be like, what the fuck? What do you mean this isn't important to you? What do you mean you're not engaged in this anymore? But it was like, being able to articulate, my brain has gone in search of dopamine because this conversation is really difficult for me and it's not giving me the dopamine. And I was like, awesome. I would rather you tell me that than try and sit here and force your way through the rest of this conversation, because we can always come back to this. We can always readdress this later. But imagine, you don't have to imagine. We've all experienced how much frustration there is when one person disengages, but they feel like it's wrong because somebody told them it's wrong, and then everybody's just pissed at each other.
So I feel like we've totally shifted into now we're talking about communication again, which I think that was the first one we ever started.
I mean, I kind of figured
like communication is everything.
Right. But also I kind of figured like two people with ADHD trying to talk about things that are all interconnected, this was going to happen.
Right.
But it is kind of a boundary to be able to say, okay, my brain has disengaged from this conversation. I can't keep going. I mean, I think it still fits as a boundary.
Okay. So I have a boundaries question for you.
Oh, lovely.
Okay, great. So not everybody is committed to personal growth.
True.
And even those who are not growing at the same rate and in the same areas at the same time.
Yes.
Okay. So how do you recommend handling it when someone sets a boundary with someone they love and the other person does not respond well?
Well, what do you want to happen if this person doesn't respond well to you? So are you talking about responding well to the fact that you've set the boundary, or like crosses the boundary and doesn't respond well to your enforcement?
Doesn't respond well to you setting the boundary.
Okay.
They think that you setting the boundary is you being aggressive.
Okay, well, that's a them problem. So
this is somebody you care about, and like this instance isn't like okay, well, this tells me like I don't need to have you in my life. Like,
right. But like ultimately you have to recognize that it is a them problem and decide that how you're going to react to it, how you're going to respond to it.
Mm-hmm.
So like they can think that you're aggressive. They can think that you're rude all day long, but you don't need to argue with them on that. You don't need to try and convince them that you're not.
Mm-hmm.
You can just say, okay, well, I'm sorry you have feelings about that, but this isn't going to change. This boundary is still in place. But then if somebody reacts poorly to the fact that you're setting boundaries, you kind of need to expect that they are going to test you on it. And so you need to decide, what am I going to do if they opt to test this boundary? How am I going to handle it? Am I going to walk away? Am I going to cut communication for a certain amount of time? Like, what is your response going to be if they try to violate your boundary? Because you don't have to engage in the conversation if they're arguing.
Right. I also had an idea as I was listening to your response. I got my own idea for how I would respond. I would get really curious and I would ask them questions. So like, if I'm like, okay, well, like, if you do this, then I'm going to do this, right? Because that's what a boundary is. Like, here's how I'm going to respond in this situation if you do say whatever. And for example, if they were to say like, that feels really aggressive. Like, I think that's crappy of you. And I think it feels really aggressive. Okay, well, tell me, what about that feels aggressive to you? Tell me more about why you perceive that as being aggressive. What is it that feels crappy about it? And just keep asking them questions. So it's not an argument. You're not defending yourself. You're making them turn inwards and reflect. So hopefully you get down to the point of them recognizing that it's a them thing and not a you thing.
Mm-hmm. And I just want to point out, like, that is a wonderful method for handling things, but also nobody is obligated to that kind of emotional labor.
Right.
Like, you.
And I'm still like, of course I'm going to do the emotional labor. That's still where I am.
Because you're a people pleaser. But like, I just want to serve that as a reminder for the other people pleasers that, you don't, just because that's an option doesn't mean you have to take it.
Yeah.
And it can vary on day to day. It can vary from person to person. With one connection that you have, you might feel invested enough that you want to expend the emotional labor. And that's where the personal responsibility and the autonomy comes in, is like, do I want to expend this emotional labor? And to what extent is it my responsibility? And what extent is it theirs? So that you're not trying to take responsibility for their feelings. Like, okay, they have feelings about your boundary. They can have feelings about it, but that doesn't make it their feelings your responsibility.
Right.
Just because it's your boundary. So like, I actually did this the other day with somebody, and I was like, so I don't want to be responsible for you having feelings to the things about the things that I say. And I'm not going to accept if you hear something that gives you feelings and just start going into woe is me. This doesn't mean that you can't have your feelings. You are entitled to feel however the fuck you feel, whenever the fuck you feel it. And this doesn't mean that I won't eventually make space to hear your feelings and hear what's going on with you and your perspective. But if I'm bringing a grievance to you, my grievance goes first. We're dealing with my shit first. And you going, oh, I'm such a terrible person, or oh, how can you even like me, or like whatever, things like that. Like, okay, valid feelings. Have your feelings, but like they get to sit on the back burner until we're done with mine, because I don't want to have to build in spending emotional labor on you into anytime I need to bring something up with you that needs to be handled.
Mhm.
And that's a really hard thing for people to hear, because they want to get defensive. They want to put it back on themselves, on how they're affected. And it's really, really common in heterosexual relationships. A woman will bring up something that's an issue, and a man will detract from the whole fucking thing
Mhm.
by making it about him and that she's brought something up, and then everybody leaves. And so it's like she never actually gets to get through her original grievance,
Yeah.
because it becomes that woe is me. And we're like, no, we're not doing this anymore.
Yeah. That's so interesting that you bring this up, because I've had this experience where I've had feelings about something, and then I like share my feelings with the person, and we talk about it for a little while, and then it doesn't take long before like my feelings have resulted in them having feelings. And so then we're like focused on their feelings, and I'm like, I mean, we talked, mine aren't gone, and now shifting gears. Okay, great. Now it's you. Okay, done with me. And then it makes me hesitate before bringing things up with them, because I'm like, I want to share this. I want you to know how I'm feeling and what I'm experiencing, and so we can deal with that. But do I really want to have to deal with the aftermath of then now suddenly you have all of these feelings? Is it worth it to me?
Right. And so
Sometimes,
oh, go ahead.
oh, that's it.
I was going to say, like, that's one of the things that I include in like my starter packet of communications with new connections too, is like, I firmly believe that if somebody is bringing feelings about something up to whatever, it doesn't matter which side it is, they get to resolve their shit first. And
Mm,
then we work on the other person or anybody else's that's in there, because that is so disheartening and so frustrating. And to be railroaded like that, that's what I call it, is railroading. Like, it's not fair to anybody. And so, and it erodes the safety and communication, and being able to set that boundary feels scary. Like, how selfish does it feel to say, we're dealing with my shit first? Like,
mhm.
hello, that feels really scary.
Yeah. But it's also hard. Like, two totally different thoughts popped up. Number one, sometimes it's hard to even identify that in the moment. Like when you share something, to even recognize like, oh, that this might potentially result in something. So sometimes you don't even realize you need the preface. But then sometimes it's also hard because it's something that comes back up later. And so like they might bring up this situation from their point of view. And then you have to gently remind them, well, hey, don't you remember that this is how it started? And like you're still seeing this through your lens, which is not actually the most accurate lens at the moment.
Mm-hmm. And it's okay that if it's more than one conversation too. Like that's fine. And I'm totally fine like cuz sometimes it'll happen where I'll be like, we're dealing with my shit first and if it brings up feelings for you that's totally valid, but like we're not going to handle that until my shit's taken care of because I'm asking for what I want first, which means we need to take care of my needs first.
Yeah.
You can't just go, "Oh, well since we're taking care of needs, here let's do mine instead."
Yeah.
But like it's totally valid if it's like they need time to process their feelings and then it becomes another conversation, but then it's them bringing up their needs, and so you're making space regardless of your feelings on it for them to share what's going on with them, and then you can work through like once the heightened emotions are past, you can work through the logical practical side of it. It's almost like humans are like really dynamic creatures with sometimes conflicting wants and needs. Imagine that.
Yeah.
I don't know. I just love boundaries so much, even though they feel scary sometimes.
Yeah. You know what I also love? When you have people in your life that don't require as many boundaries.
Because they just operate on the same wavelength that you do.
Yeah.
It's almost like your standards are on the same level.
Yeah. In your group, you said something about boundaries. This was weeks ago. And you were like, are you upset because somebody like violated your boundary, or are you upset because like you didn't even set the boundary in the first place or something like that? And I responded, I was like, I'm upset that I have to set boundaries in the first place. And somebody replied and they were like, this. Yes, I want all of you to just, I want so much of this to fucking be common sense.
And that's why all of this is shit you should have learned in school. Because if we all learned this decades ago, it would be common sense by now.
And this is my favorite part of parenting. My favorite part of parenting is like having conversations with my kids and like modeling and teaching them how to be like high functioning adults. And I don't mean like go out and get a job high functioning. I mean like your interpersonal communication and relationships with people, because that affects everything.
That's what I told my kids. I was like, I really couldn't care less. Because, I mean, in our state, even with homeschooling, they're still required to do like a standardized test. And I was like, I really don't give a shit about your scores. I want you to be able to be a healthy human. That matters to me so much more. Like,
how are you going to navigate conflict?
Exactly. And like, it's funny because my middle teenager gets really frustrated with their peers for not being direct and for like not stating their needs and then getting frustrated and upset after the fact. And so that was a conversation we had about a year ago, is that you are probably going to feel very frustrated with your peers because your emotional intelligence far exceeds what they're even exposed to at this point, much less actively taught.
Right.
And it's true. So it's like, and then I feel really proud, like when the oldest is like using these tools with adults in their lives. And I was like, fuck yes. I'm sorry that you have to teach adults how to treat you like a decent human, but also I'm so fucking proud of you.
Yeah.
We are going to raise up some pretty awesome fucking people, though.
Yeah, we are.
It gives me a modicum of hope if the world still exists. I'm not very good at avoiding the doom and gloom of reality. It's just what I do. But anyway, let's end on a happier note than the doom and gloom of what life is. So this was a great talk on boundaries. And like, what, I get to see you a month from now? Less than that. 3 weeks.
A month from now, we'll be done seeing each other.
Yeah. Fucking 3 weeks from now. Maybe we can do one in person. Wouldn't that be amazing?
Amazing.
That would be so amazing. Hey, we could have like guests.
Thinking that.
Since there will be, what, 5 of us? I think 6, something like that. That'll be so cool. Cool. We can plan for that.
Awesome.
All right. Well, you have a fabulous fucking day.
Thank you. You too.
And we will talk next week.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.